Have you ever wondered what happens when a human ATM finally snaps? I spent 10 years building an empire, only to watch my blood relatives drain it dry. They assumed luxury was their birthright, and I was just an emotionless puppet. But they forgot the cruelest rule of survival. The person who builds a paradise can burn it to the ground in a single night. This is not a goodbye. It is a flawless financial execution. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep producing these videos for you. If you enjoy today's story and want to support our work, please consider joining our Patreon family, where you will find exclusive, true revenge stories that are even longer, more detailed, and feature multiple emotional voice actors, content that is just too intense to publish on YouTube. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description and pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story, where I, Gianna Kennedy, learned the true cost of family. By the time I was 34 years old, I had built Apex Horizon Media from a tiny, struggling startup into a prestigious media powerhouse. I was the sole founder, the solitary brain behind every major corporate acquisition, and the engine that kept the entire machine running day and night. But if you looked at our executive payroll, you would think it was a historic family dynasty. For years, I had foolishly shielded my family from the harsh realities of the real world. I created high-paying executive positions for my mother, Margaret, my younger sister, Chloe, and my younger brother, Jackson. They were directors in name only. They were dummy executives who collected massive six-figure salaries without ever stepping foot inside a boardroom, managing a single team, or reading a basic financial report. I genuinely thought I was being a good daughter and a fiercely protective older sister. Instead, I was actively breeding parasites. We lived together in one of the most exclusive, breathtaking luxury penthouses in downtown Chicago. We had floor-to-ceiling windows, private elevators, and a panoramic view that made the rest of the city look like insignificant ants. My family swiped the corporate credit cards of Apex Horizon Media with a reckless, staggering entitlement. They bought limited edition designer bags, booked spontaneous weekend trips to Paris, and ordered cases of rare vintage champagne on a random Tuesday night. It was an endless, glittering feast of extreme wealth, all funded entirely by the relentless sweat off my back. In their minds, my only purpose on this earth was to finance their endless vanity. They truly believed they had a divine, royal right to my empire. To them, I was nothing more than the awkward, boring workaholic who existed solely to sign checks and pay their astronomical bills. The atmosphere in that Chicago penthouse was always suffocating. An incredibly toxic mix of high society pretension and deep-seated, ungrateful parasitism. I ignored the glaring warning signs for years because they were my own blood. But blood is just liquid until it starts draining you dry. The fragile illusion finally shattered exactly 3 days before Christmas Eve. The penthouse was heavily decorated with frosted silver ornaments and expensive imported fir trees. The three of them had gathered in the main living room, sipping $1,000 wine, eagerly planning their latest grand escape from their exhausting lives of doing absolutely nothing. They had drawn up an absurdly lavish itinerary for a 1-month luxury ski retreat in Aspen. They wanted private chalets, exclusive ski passes, personal chefs, and round-the-clock chauffeur services. When they casually handed me the massive invoice and demanded I authorize the immediate release of the company reserve funds to cover it, I finally looked at them and said no. I calmly explained that it was the end of the fiscal year. We were actively restructuring our major media assets, and the corporate reserve fund was strictly off-limits for personal use. I told them they would have to settle for a normal, quiet holiday right here in Chicago. The reaction was immediate, explosive, and vicious. The festive air in the room turned to solid ice. Jackson sneered, swirling the dark red wine in his crystal glass, and called me a pathetic, joyless drone who did not know how to live a real life. Chloe quickly chimed in. laughing that high, piercing, condescending laugh of hers, aggressively mocking my conservative business suits and my endless late nights at the office. She boldly stated that I was just bitterly jealous because they were beautiful, vibrant, and popular. While I was nothing more than a walking, breathing corporate spreadsheet, I stood perfectly still, taking the barrage of verbal abuse, quietly watching the ugly, twisted faces of the people I had clothed, fed, and sheltered for a decade. I slowly turned my gaze to my mother, fully expecting her to finally intervene, to be the mature voice of reason and calm her spoiled children. Margaret did not defend me. Her perfectly lifted face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. She snatched the glossy travel brochures off the imported marble coffee table and hurled them directly at my face with startling force. The heavy, sharp paper slapped hard against my cheek, scattering violently across the antique Persian rug. She stepped closer, her cold eyes narrowing as she looked at me with an absolute, chilling contempt that I will never forget. "The best gift you could give this family would be if you just disappeared," she hissed. Her cruel words hung in the quiet air, thick, heavy, and absolutely deliberate. I did not cry. I did not scream, or beg, or try to desperately explain the company financials to them one more time. I simply stood frozen, staring deeply into the souls of the three of them. Jackson and Chloe were actually giggling, thoroughly enjoying the dramatic show, entirely confident that I would eventually break down, apologize profusely, and wire the Aspen funds by morning like the obedient cash cow I had always been. But as I stood there watching them laugh at my expense, something inside me completely snapped. A quiet, profound, and irreversible shift occurred in the deepest, darkest part of my mind. The loyal sister and desperate daughter they knew died right there on that expensive rug. In her place, a cold, ruthless, and terrifyingly clear decision took form. They sincerely wanted me to disappear. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I did not utter a single syllable in response. I simply turned on my heel and walked slowly and deliberately toward the heavy oak double doors. Behind me, the festive, upbeat jazz of a classic Christmas carol continued to play, entirely undisturbed by the emotional execution that had just occurred. I heard the sharp, distinct clink of crystal glasses meeting in the air. "Cheers to Aspen!" Jackson declared loudly, ensuring his arrogant voice carried down the grand hallway to reach my ears. They were celebrating, in their deluded minds. My silence was not a permanent departure, but merely my standard, predictable routine of sulking. They were absolutely convinced that I would wander the freezing downtown streets for an hour or two, feel overwhelmingly guilty for ruining their holiday spirit, and return before dinner clutching 3 first-class plane tickets to Colorado as a desperate peace offering. Let them drink. Let them celebrate their imaginary victory. The private elevator descended smoothly to the underground residential garage. The air down here was cold and smelled faintly of expensive exhaust and damp concrete. I walked right past Jackson's aggressive, customized Porsche and Chloe's immaculate white Mercedes, finally sliding into the driver's seat of my own modest corporate sedan. I locked the heavy doors and opened my laptop, letting the harsh blue light wash over the dark dashboard. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the master asset ledger for Apex Horizon Media. As my eyes scanned the columns of encrypted financial data, a bitter, utterly ridiculous truth washed over me. It was a fact so simple, yet so profound, that I actually let out a dry, hollow laugh in the empty garage. My family owned absolutely nothing. Zero. They carried themselves like old money aristocrats, dripping in diamonds and disdain, but their entire existence was a legally binding house of cards built entirely on my company credit profile. The master lease for that sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse towering above me, it was signed, sealed, and guaranteed exclusively by Apex Horizon Media. Those flashy luxury vehicles they parked in the exclusive VIP bays, they were commercial fleet leases, registered under my corporate tax identification number. The heavy titanium black cards they slapped onto spa counters and restaurant tables With such arrogant flair, they were nothing more than supplementary employee expense accounts. They did not have a single tangible asset to their actual names. They had zero equity, zero personal savings, and zero properties. They were just ghosts haunting a glittering mansion that I paid for. My hands did not shake as I opened a new secure browser tab. I bypassed the usual corporate travel portal and went directly to a commercial airline website. I typed in a destination I had kept entirely secret from everyone, a remote, snow-buried wooden cabin tucked away in the deepest mountains of Montana. I had purchased it under a blind trust 12 months prior, intending to use it as a peaceful, off-the-grid retirement sanctuary decades down the line. Now, it would serve as my fortress. I selected a one-way ticket departing from O'Hare International Airport in exactly 2 hours. I paid the exorbitant last-minute fare, closed the laptop, and started the engine. I did not pack a single piece of luggage. I did not look back at the towering glass skyscraper as I drove out into the freezing Chicago night. The airport was a chaotic sea of frantic holiday travelers rushing to get home, but I moved through the noisy crowds like an invisible phantom. I felt no sorrow, no grief, and not a single drop of remorse. When the flight attendant poured my pre-departure champagne in the business class cabin, I politely declined and asked for a cup of black coffee instead. As soon as the heavy aircraft reached cruising altitude and the seatbelt sign chimed off, I flipped open my laptop and connected to the premium in-flight network. While my mother and siblings were undoubtedly still upstairs in the penthouse, tipsily packing their designer ski gear into luxury trunks, I was operating with the cold, mechanical precision of a military drone. I opened my encrypted email client and began drafting a series of devastating legal directives. These were not emotional letters or angry rants. They were surgical, legally binding corporate orders designed to systematically dismantle their entire fake high society world. I typed out strict, irrevocable instructions to my chief financial officer, my lead corporate attorney, and the property management conglomerate. I structured the emails to trigger a cascade of automated financial terminations. I detailed the exact clauses in our corporate bylaws that allowed for the immediate dissolution of redundant executive departments. I cross-referenced the vehicle lease agreements, noting the precise legal statutes that permitted a business to surrender corporate cars without warning. I was not leaving a single loophole for them to exploit, nor a single dollar for them to drain. Every sentence I composed was a heavy iron nail in the coffin of their parasitic lifestyle. The altitude outside was 30,000 feet, and the temperature was 40 degrees below zero. But it was nowhere near as cold as the absolute vengeance coursing through my veins. The tires of my rental SUV crunched against the thick, packed snow as I pulled up to the secluded cabin in Montana. It was well past midnight. The air outside was aggressively cold, but the heavy log walls of my hidden sanctuary offered absolute silence. I did not bother turning on the main heating system or unpacking my coat. I walked straight to the solid oak dining table, opened my laptop, and connected to my private satellite internet. The screen illuminated the dark room, casting a pale glow over my hands as I cracked my knuckles. It was time to execute. My first target was the primary artery of their extravagant lifestyle, the corporate credit accounts. I logged into the commercial banking portal, bypassing 2 layers of biometric security. The dashboard loaded, displaying the real-time spending habits of my so-called executive board. Even while I had been flying, Chloe had charged $800 at a high-end cosmetics boutique, and Jackson had racked up a $1,200 tab at a VIP nightclub. I clicked on the User Management tab. There they were, listed as authorized signers on the corporate master account. With a slow, deliberate exhale, I highlighted all 3 names. I selected the option marked Permanent Revocation. A warning box flashed on the screen, asking me to confirm that I wanted to freeze these secondary cards immediately. I did not just freeze them, I deleted their user profiles from the banking matrix entirely. The system processed the request with a tiny green checkmark, just like that. Their endless flow of liquid capital evaporated into thin air. Next, I picked up my phone and dialed the direct emergency line for the elite property management conglomerate that owned the Chicago skyscraper. The senior account manager answered on the third ring, his voice groggy but quickly shifting to high-alert professional courtesy when I identified myself. I instructed him to pull up the master lease for the penthouse. I am officially invoking the emergency corporate withdrawal clause on that property, I told him, keeping my tone perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. I heard him vigorously typing on his end. He nervously reminded me that invoking that specific clause without a standard 30-day notice meant I would instantly forfeit the massive security deposit, a sum of $250,000. I am fully aware of the financial penalty, I replied. Keep the deposit. Consider it an extreme convenience fee. In exchange, I require you to issue a mandatory 24-hour eviction notice to the current occupants. The corporation is no longer liable for the premises, and any individuals remaining inside are officially trespassing. He stammered for a second before confirming that building security would enforce the strict lockout protocols. I ended the call and immediately dialed the corporate fleet liaison at the Luxury Automotive Group. I gave the representative the identification numbers for the 3 vehicles. I formally declared that Apex Horizon Media was withdrawing all financial guarantees and insurance coverage for those specific cars, effective immediately. The corporate lease is terminated, I stated firmly. You have my full authorization to dispatch recovery teams to repossess the assets at your earliest convenience tomorrow. They are parked in the underground residential bays at their registered address. The representative assured me that the tow trucks would be dispatched at dawn. Then came the most ruthless, fatal blow of the entire operation. I opened a secure, encrypted video conference link with my lead corporate attorney, who was already waiting on standby despite the late hour. We bypassed the usual pleasantries. He shared a highly classified digital document on my screen. It was a formal corporate restructuring order. By signing it, I was legally dissolving the entire internal communications department, the exact department my mother supposedly managed. I read through the dense legal jargon with immense satisfaction. This document did not just terminate their employment, it severed their access to the premium executive health insurance, halted all pending bonuses, and legally blocked any severance packages due to gross negligence and violation of company policy. I applied my encrypted digital signature to the bottom of the form. File it with the State Commerce Board instantly. I instructed my lawyer. I want them entirely scrubbed from the company registry. The true beauty of this financial execution was not just the actions themselves, but the meticulous timing of the delivery. I utilized a specialized corporate mailing software to queue up all the official termination notices, the lease cancellation, the insurance severance, and the bank alerts. I programmed the master server to release every single email and automated text message at exactly 6 o'clock in the morning on December 24th. I knew exactly what this timing meant. Tomorrow was the absolute peak of the holiday season. The financial institutions would be running on skeleton crews, the corporate law firms would be closed for the weekend, and customer service lines would be overwhelmed or entirely offline. My mother, sister, and brother would wake up to a total, catastrophic financial collapse, and there would be absolutely no one sitting at a desk anywhere in the country willing to answer their panicked phone calls. I had locked them in a burning room and thrown the only key into the ocean. I finally closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of aged whiskey, and watched the snow fall outside my window, waiting for the sun to rise on their destruction. The morning of December 24th broke over Chicago with a bitter, freezing wind, but inside the ultra-exclusive Lumiere Wellness Spa on the Magnificent Mile, the climate was artificially tropical. Chloe had booked a full morning of gold leaf facials and hot stone massages to prepare her skin for the dry mountain air of Aspen. She lounged at the marble reception desk in a plush white robe, chatting loudly with 2 other socialite daughters about her upcoming month-long ski trip. When the spa manager presented her with a bill for $4,500, Chloe did not even look at the total. She simply flicked her titanium corporate card across the counter with a practiced, arrogant flick of her wrist. The receptionist inserted the heavy metal into the reader. The machine let out a sharp, discordant beep. The screen flashed red. The receptionist frowned, apologized politely, and tried the transaction again. Another sharp beep. The manager stepped forward. His voice lowered to a discreet whisper, informing Chloe that the bank had flagged the account as permanently closed. Chloe let out a sharp, condescending laugh, loudly declaring that their machine must be broken because she possessed a limitless corporate expense account. She aggressively pulled out her secondary emergency credit card and shoved it into the manager's hand. That one was declined too. The entire lobby went dead silent. The other wealthy women in the room stopped talking and stared. The manager coldly informed Chloe that she would need to provide an alternative form of payment immediately, or the police would be called for theft of services. For the first time in her pampered life, Chloe felt the crushing, suffocating weight of public humiliation. She had to abandon her designer coat and run out into the freezing street in her spa slippers just to escape the judging eyes of the elite circle she had bragged to only moments before. At that exact same moment, 3 blocks away, Jackson was standing in the window of an artisanal coffee boutique, waiting for his $12 imported matcha latte. He was busy admiring his own reflection in the glass, wearing a heavy designer winter coat and holding the keys to his beloved Porsche. Suddenly, a massive, rusted commercial tow truck reversed aggressively into the VIP parking zone right in front of the cafe. A heavy-set driver jumped out, unfurled a thick steel cable, and attached it directly to the front axle of Jackson's pristine sports car. Jackson dropped his coffee on the floor and sprinted out the door, screaming at the top of his lungs, demanding the man step away from his property. He threatened lawsuits, he threatened physical violence, and he aggressively waved his key fob in the air. The tow truck driver did not even flinch. He calmly pulled a thick clipboard from his jacket and shoved a yellow carbon copy document directly into Jackson's chest. The driver loudly announced, in front of a dozen watching pedestrians, that the vehicle was being repossessed by the dealership due to a massive corporate contract violation. Jackson screamed that he was a senior executive and the car belonged to him. The driver just laughed, engaged the hydraulic winch, and hoisted the luxury vehicle into the air. Jackson could only stand there on the icy sidewalk, his expensive boots soaking in spilled coffee, completely paralyzed as he watched his ultimate status symbol being hauled away into the chaotic morning traffic. But the absolute crown jewel of this synchronized destruction occurred high above the city, inside the penthouse. My mother, Margaret, was standing on a velvet pedestal in the center of the grand living room. A private tailor had been summoned to perform last-minute alterations on a custom silk evening gown she planned to wear for a New Year gala in Colorado. Her grand delusion was abruptly shattered by a violent, booming knock at the heavy mahogany double doors. It was not a polite tap. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of law enforcement. Margaret angrily marched to the foyer, throwing open the door to berate whoever dared to interrupt her fitting. She found herself face to face with the building's strict property manager and 2 armed, uniformed security officers. The manager did not utter a single greeting. He simply slapped a massive, bright red sticker directly onto the center of the beautiful wooden door. It was an emergency eviction notice. The manager coldly informed her that the corporate lease held by Apex Horizon Media had been officially canceled and all financial deposits had been surrendered. He looked Margaret dead in the eye and stated that she and her children had until exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon to gather whatever personal belongings they could carry and vacate the premises. If they were still inside the apartment at 1 minute past 5, they would be arrested for criminal trespassing. By noon, the 3 of them had converged back inside the penthouse, their arrogant confidence entirely replaced by a frantic, hyperventilating panic. The sheer reality of their situation began to close in on them like a collapsing tunnel. They pulled out their phones and frantically dialed my number. They called me dozens, then hundreds of times. Every single attempt was met with the exact same automated, soulless voice recording informing them that the number they had reached was no longer in service. I had destroyed my phone's cellular connection the moment I landed in Montana. In a state of absolute desperation, they opened their personal banking applications, desperately searching for any hidden safety net. The screens loaded, revealing a truth that made them physically sick. The balances displayed $0. for all the millions they had spent over the years, for all the luxury goods and lavish vacations they had consumed. Not a single one of them had ever bothered to save one solitary cent. They had lived their entire lives firmly attached to my veins, completely oblivious to the fact that they had no lifeblood of their own. As the afternoon sky darkened and the clock ticked relentlessly toward 5 o'clock, the luxurious dream of an Aspen ski retreat completely disintegrated. The penthouse transformed into a chaotic war zone. They frantically tried to pack their lives into designer trunks, screaming at each other, crying in disbelief, and tearing through closets, but you cannot pack a lifestyle into a suitcase. When the heavy footsteps of the security detail echoed down the marble hallway exactly at the deadline, they were forced to abandon everything that made them feel important. They left behind the antique furniture, the cases of vintage wine, and the massive walk-in closets full of tailored clothing. The armed guards marched them out of the building like common criminals. They were escorted through the grand lobby under the watchful, whispering gaze of the very neighbors they had always looked down upon. The heavy glass doors of the luxury high-rise closed behind them with a definitive, fatal click. They stood completely stranded on the freezing, snow-covered pavement of the Chicago streets. The wind howled around them, biting through their expensive clothes. They were dragging a few heavy rolling suitcases, awkwardly balancing their remaining possessions on the icy concrete. They had no cars waiting for them in the garage. They had no luxurious penthouse to return to. They had no money to rent even a cheap motel room. In the span of a few short hours, the human ATM they had so confidently told to disappear had granted their wish, leaving them with absolutely nothing but the cold, harsh reality of their own extreme incompetence. The freezing wind eventually forced them to seek shelter inside a rundown, neon-lit diner on the absolute outskirts of the commercial district. It was a far cry from the Michelin-starred restaurants and velvet-roped VIP lounges they usually frequented. The cracked vinyl booths were sticky, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, and the heavy smell of stale grease hung aggressively in the air. They sat crammed in a corner booth, their absurdly expensive leather luggage stacked haphazardly around them like the tragic ruins of a fallen empire. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably into a cheap, rough paper napkin, her face completely bare of the expensive cosmetics she usually wore, mascara running down her cheeks in dark, ugly streaks. Jackson was staring blankly at the scratched table, violently bouncing his leg in a state of absolute, paralyzing shock. But Margaret was not crying. Her initial panic had rapidly mutated into a blind, venomous, and highly irrational rage. She slammed her manicured finger against her phone screen, desperately scouring her contact list until she found the direct private number of my lead corporate attorney. She hit dial and pressed the phone to her ear, her face twisting into a grotesque sneer. When the lawyer answered with a calm, perfectly flat greeting, Margaret completely exploded. "You listen to me, you pathetic little suit," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly across the empty diner, drawing annoyed, disgusted glances from the tired waitstaff and the few solitary customers drinking cheap coffee. "I am going to sue my ungrateful, psychotic daughter for every single penny she has ever made. I am going to drag her name through the mud, go to the press, and legally destroy her miserable business. She cannot illegally evict us from our own home. She cannot terminate my executive position without a formal board review. I demand you reinstate our corporate funds this exact second, or I will personally ensure your legal license is permanently revoked by tomorrow morning." She paused, breathing heavily, entirely expecting the lawyer to cower, stumble over his words, and apologize profusely, just like everyone else always did when she threw a calculated tantrum. Instead, a heavy, agonizing, and terrifying silence stretched across the line. When my attorney finally spoke, his voice was chillingly devoid of any emotion, cutting through her hysteria like a surgical scalpel. "Margaret, I highly suggest you lower your voice, sit down, and open the email I just sent to your personal address. You will want to review it very, very carefully before you utter another ridiculous threat." Margaret scoffed loudly, a harsh sound of pure arrogance, but she pulled the phone away from her ear, swiping aggressively to open her inbox. A new message sat at the top, containing a single, heavily encrypted attachment. She tapped it with her trembling finger. The file downloaded, and a dense, highly detailed dossier opened on her bright screen. Jackson stopped bouncing his leg and leaned over her shoulder, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read the tiny, complex text. "What is this garbage?" Margaret hissed back into the receiver, though her voice wavered slightly. "That," the lawyer replied smoothly, "is a meticulously documented chain of undeniable evidence. It contains time-stamped digital access logs, secure server routing addresses, and high-resolution security footage from the downtown corporate office exactly 3 weeks ago. It clearly shows you and Jackson illegally accessing Gianna's private executive terminal late at night." The blood instantly drained from Margaret's face, leaving her looking hollow and sickly under the diner lights. Jackson suddenly stopped breathing, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. The lawyer continued, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "The second half of that document contains the fraudulent equity transfer contracts you two secretly drafted. You attempted to digitally forge Gianna's authorized signature to forcibly reassign 51% of the voting shares of Apex Horizon Media directly into a hidden shell company controlled exclusively by Jackson. You were actively trying to execute a hostile, highly illegal takeover of your own daughter's empire." Chloe, who had been drowning in her own self-pity, suddenly stopped crying. She looked up, her red, swollen eyes darting between her mother's pale face and her brother's trembling, guilty hands. "Wait," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking as the reality of the lawyer's words washed over her. "A shell company controlled by Jackson. What about me? You were going to cut me out too." Gianna did not just randomly snap over a luxury ski trip to Aspen, the attorney stated loudly, ensuring every single word acted as a heavy blow to their shattered egos. "She has known about your pathetic little corporate coup for 21 days. She let you continue planning your luxurious holidays. She let you pack your bags. She let you confidently believe you were completely untouchable. The financial termination she executed today was not a temper tantrum. It was a preemptive, completely legal strike to protect her corporate assets from 2 documented felons." Margaret tried to speak, tried to formulate some twisted defense or shifting of blame, but her throat tightened. The arrogant, commanding matriarch was suddenly reduced to a terrified, cornered animal. "Here is the absolute reality of your current situation," the attorney commanded, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. "That entire dossier, complete with the forged documents, the network logs, and the video evidence, has already been packaged and delivered to the Federal Economic Crime Division. However, Gianna has instructed them to hold the file pending her final authorization. You have one option, and one option only. You will never contact Gianna again. You will not go to the press. You will not post a single word on any social media platform. You will disappear into the miserable, impoverished life you have just violently earned for yourselves. Because if you ever attempt to retaliate, or if you ever try to reach out to her in any capacity, I will personally make one phone call, and federal arrest warrants for corporate fraud and identity theft will be issued for both of you before you can even blink. Have a very Merry Christmas." The line went dead with a sharp, echoing click. Margaret slowly lowered the phone. Her hands were shaking so violently, she nearly dropped the expensive device onto the dirty floor. She stared blankly at the cold cup of diner coffee in front of her. "You forged her signature!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. Ignoring the stares of the diner staff, she violently shoved her brother's shoulder. "You tried to steal the company and leave me with nothing. Are you completely insane?" "Shut up, Chloe," Jackson violently snapped back, his own sheer panic morphing into a vicious, ugly defense. "We were trying to secure our permanent future. Gianna was getting too controlling. She was suffocating us. It was Mom's idea anyway. Do not you dare blame this on me. You incompetent, useless fool," Margaret screamed, slamming her palms hard against the scratched table. You were the one who hired that shady online notary. You left the massive digital trail. You ruined absolutely everything. The grand, polished illusion of their tight-knit, superior family dynamic instantly shattered into a million jagged, irredeemable pieces. Right there, under the flickering fluorescent lights of a cheap diner on a freezing holy night. The three parasites fully turned on each other. They screamed, cursed, and viciously tore at each other's throats, entirely consumed by the bitter, inescapable realization of their own catastrophic failure. Their blind, bottomless greed had not just bitten the hand that fed them, it had completely severed it. They had slaughtered the only golden goose they had ever known, and now they were left with absolutely nothing but the rotting, stinking corpse of their own arrogance. The heavy oak logs crackled warmly in the massive stone fireplace of my hidden Montana cabin. I sat deep in a plush, oversized armchair, my fingers wrapped around the stem of a crystal glass filled with a rich, dark red wine. Outside the frosted window panes, thick, heavy snowflakes drifted silently through the towering evergreen trees, completely blanketing the isolated wilderness in a perfect, undisturbed layer of pure white. For the first time in 34 years, I was not frantically orchestrating a chaotic, extravagant holiday dinner to appease unpleasable people. I was not exhausted, I was not stressed, and I was certainly not signing astronomical corporate checks to fund the empty vanities of ungrateful relatives. I was entirely, wonderfully alone. As the firelight danced across the wooden walls, I took a slow, deep breath. It was the most profound, absolute sense of peace I had ever known. That silent, snowy Christmas Eve was not just a holiday, it was a rebirth. As the freezing winter eventually melted into a mild spring, the glittering high society illusion my family had so fiercely defended was completely brutally obliterated. Word travels incredibly fast in elite, wealthy circles, and the catastrophic, public collapse of their imaginary wealth made them immediate, undeniable outcasts, with the massive, terrifying shadow of federal fraud investigations permanently hanging over her head. My mother was forced into a harsh, unforgiving reality check. Margaret, the fiercely arrogant woman who once threw luxury travel brochures directly at my face, now works 40 grueling hours a week as a low-level customer service operator at a noisy, soul-crushing call center. She spends her days getting yelled at by angry strangers over the phone, desperately trying to pay down the absolute mountain of hidden personal debts the financial investigators unearthed. Her prestigious, untouchable reputation has been entirely wiped off the map. Jackson and Chloe fared absolutely no better. Stripped of their fake, unearned executive titles and possessing zero actual real-world skills or work ethic, they found themselves utterly unemployable in the professional corporate sector. My deeply arrogant brother and my incredibly vain sister were abruptly forced to enter the real workforce. They now survive by working exhausting, part-time manual labor shifts, making minimum wage, unable to afford anything else. The two of them live crammed together in a tiny, dilapidated, roach-infested one-bedroom apartment on the far industrial edge of the city. Back in the corporate world, I completely and ruthlessly restructured Apex Horizon Media from the ground up. I permanently replaced the dummy executive board with fiercely intelligent, truly talented professionals who actually brought value to the table and earned their salaries. Stripped of the massive, parasitic drain that had been suffocating our bottom line for over a decade, the company absolutely exploded. Within 6 short months, our overall operational efficiency skyrocketed, and our annual revenue effectively doubled. My empire was finally clean, thriving, and entirely my own. I took a final, slow sip of my red wine, staring deeply into the dancing orange flames, and allowed myself a genuine, lasting smile. There are people who demand you disappear from their lives simply because they believe you lack the courage to actually do it. But sometimes, the cruelest and most deserved gift you can give them is to grant their exact request. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning into my story today. I would sincerely love to know, where in the world are you listening from right now? If you found today's journey satisfying and want to help support our work, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. Over there, you can listen to the absolute best, highly exclusive, and intensely real revenge stories that we simply cannot publish publicly on YouTube. You can easily join our family right now by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by using the direct Patreon link provided in the video description and pinned comment below. Stay strong, and never let anyone take advantage of your hard work.